Nobody likes to talk about grief. Nobody likes to talk about the things that hurt us, but those things do hold us back.
You're listening to Good Faith Weekly. I'm Mitch Randall.
And I'm Missy Randall.
We're here each week exploring the intersection of faith and culture
We find people who stand up, speak out, and step forward.
for inclusion, freedom, and justice for all.
It's time for Good Faith Weekly.
Brought to you by Good Faith Media. Welcome to Good Faith Weekly. Missy and I are going to catch up on the current events, especially what happened over this last weekend in the No Kings marches that took place all across the country. And then later on, Missy and I sat down with Reverend Liz Walker, who's the former pastor at Roxbury Presbyterian Church. She's got a brand new book out called No One Left Alone, a story of how community can help us. And it is a fascinating conversation we have with Reverend Liz. So stay tuned. It's going to be a great pod. Hello there, Missy.
Hey, how are you?
I'm well, and you?
I'm good.
No, wait.
I know.
You're good?
I know.
Stop the presses.
I wish everybody could see the expression on your face. You weren't expecting that, were you?
I was not expecting good. No.
You're worried now, aren't you?
I am really worried.
No, I'm really excited about our guest today, Liz Walker, which I'll talk about here in a little bit and explain why. But yeah, it's just got me feeling happy today.
Yeah, I'm really excited about guest as well today. But before we get started today, Missy, I've got a bone to pick with you.
That's not how this podcast goes.
Oh, no, this is a good one.
This is not allowed, nor was it submitted ahead of time. So sorry. There's some sort of Robert's Rules of Podcast violation happening here.
Well, here is my bone to pick with you. And that is, so I was out of town for quite a while. I was in Ukraine, Poland, then got here, went straight back to D.C. for an event. And when I came home, I mean, you did a great job with everything.
Uh-huh.
But I go to the refrigerator and I open up the freezer.
Uh-huh.
And there's a bag, a large bag in the freezer. I first was taken aback thinking, could this be a body? But no.
You never know.
So I open up this bag thinking, oh, you bought some, steaks or, ribeyes. I kind of got excited, to be honest with you. But no, guess what it was?
It was my trash.
It's trash.
And why would you think I was putting steak in a trash bag?
I don't know, but why? Why,
All right, listen.
why is there trash in our freezer?
Listen. If you're going to continue to bounce and leave me on my own for 2 weeks by myself while there are clearly all sorts of nefarious people outside of the backyard waiting to, I don't know, pounce and attack and kidnap
Skunks,
me.
possums.
Listen. When you're gone, I don't like to take the trash out at night by myself.
But there were a lot of days.
There were.
Along that.
Also, the other thing is, when you're gone, I find myself making a lot of fish, just salmon or because it's real easy. One
okay.
person to throw some fish
Sure,
in the skillet
okay.
and some veggies or whatever. And so I do that a lot. Well, you can't leave that sitting in your trash can, right? And
Right.
it's after dinner time. It's dark. I'm not going out there by myself. No, absolutely no way. There was one time I did have to go in the backyard by myself because the garage door had been left open and it wouldn't close. I couldn't figure out why.
Yeah.
So it was like 11 o'clock at night. I texted the neighbor. She came over. It was a whole thing. But anyways,
Wow.
so this is how strongly I feel about this. So no, I just put a trash. I mean, basically, we're empty nesters now of several years.
Right.
We travel a lot. Our refrigerator looks like that of a 25-year-old
It
bachelor.
does.
It's embarrassing, you guys. So I've actually taken to storing things in the refrigerator and freezer that you wouldn't normally because, hey, we've downsized and there's space.
Yeah, I've seen some nice reading material there in the,
I know.
in the crisper.
So no, I just kind of put a trash bag in the freezer and then just throw stuff that's gonna stink in the freezer. I just forgot to take
Well,
it out
you will
before
be glad
go.
to know that I have deposited the trash from the freezer to
I appreciate that.
the bin.
Thank you. I was not intended for you to discover that, but alas, you
Yeah,
did.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
sorry,
So,
not sorry, I
yeah,
guess.
exactly. So,
So, anyways,
yes,
let's move on.
let's
And
move
you
on.
know what? Next time you need to submit these things ahead of
Okay,
time.
sorry about that.
Yeah, so let's talk about what's been going on.
Yeah,
Well, also tons of stuff has been going
sure.
on, but you, like you said, you got home from Ukraine, bounced to DC, came right back, and then had the No Kings rally
Yeah,
last week that you covered. You
yep.
want to talk? Let's talk a little bit about that and what it was, what your experience was. I know for me, I was supposed to go with you, but woke up with some sort of weird eye situation, had to go run to the doctor. So I sat home and was watching a lot of the coverage, both local and national, on TV. And I got to tell you, I was shocked
Yeah.
at how many people turned out across the country for this. I was not at all what I was expecting.
Mhm.
You went to kind of cover it for a little bit and thought you'd get some pictures and everything. And even you called and said, "Oh my gosh, the people keep coming and keep coming and keep coming." So I thought, given the scope of it, and I don't know if you know this or not, but watching people online, there were a lot of strong opinions about it.
Shocker.
So I just thought it might be worth talking about for a
Yeah.
few minutes about what was the impetus for such a turnout
Mhm.
nationwide.
Yeah, well, I had the fortunate opportunity to go down to downtown Oklahoma City and participate in the No Kings rally in downtown. And so got up early that morning, went down. Similar to you, was kind of not expecting the enormity of the crowd that
Mm-hmm.
gathered. And so I got there to City Hall. The march had not started yet. And even before the march, there were a lot of people at City Hall. And there was kind of this incredible atmosphere. There were songs being played, there were people laughing and singing and talking about the signs. Oh my gosh, the signs were incredible all across the country. So,
Wait, can I interject one quick second?
yeah.
Our son who lives in Los Angeles, he also went out to the rally there, kind of just
Mhm.
to participate. And he told us after, he said, I'm just really glad I'm on the side with all the creatives. The signs are much better.
Yeah, that was pretty funny. But no, I mean the experience overall, it was a great atmosphere. The speakers did a good job articulating their particular cause or the reason that they were there. Obviously, across the entire country, the main reason for people coming out is their opposition to this current administration.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just really eye opening because some reports are suggesting that this is one of the largest national protests in American history. Uh, I don't even really know what the numbers were, but 5 million seems to be thrown out there every now and again, but
Yeah.
it could be north of south of that to some extent. But I mean, it just really was the enormity of the turnout. The spirit of each and every protest across the country was really remarkable. And like I said, the main reason people came out is their opposition to the current administration. But it started me thinking,
Mm-hmm.
and you and I have had this conversation
Mm-hmm.
of it was really appropriate for them to come out on No Kings Saturday. There is a larger issue that I think a serious issue that we need to address in this country.
Well, we didn't get here in a vacuum. I
No,
mean, that's the thing. How did we get to this point? And
yeah.
that's always an important thing to think about and to mull over. And that's what you and I have kind of been
Yeah,
talking about.
because the critics of the No Kings rallies and marches says we don't have a monarchy. I mean, Donald Trump is not a king; he's a
If he was,
president.
he wouldn't allow the
Right,
protest, all these kind of
right.
tropes. Yeah.
But they're missing the point, and I would even say some of our allies are missing the point because what I see, and this is really just my opinion, and my analysis of what's going on in this country, and that is the centralization of power within the executive branch of government. We've got three branches of government here. We've got legislative branch, judicial branch, and the executive branch. Well, the problem that I see, it seems to me as though that the legislative branch really can't get anything done substantial unless they have a majority
Mm-hmm.
in Congress. So they only pass legislation that's beneficial to their party. And what is even more concerning is because of the partisanship that we find in Congress, it has become just really static, and they just have an inability to pass anything that has deep meaning
Mm-hmm.
and deep results for the entire country. And therefore, the executive branch is having to act more and more,
using executive orders to get anything done. And that is problematic, no matter who's in the White House.
Right.
And so, no, we don't have a king per se, but the entire country seems to be moving more to kind of a monarchy type of rule, a majority type of rule, instead of actually working together. I think the founders, when they came up with this idea of self-governance, were actually brilliant, because it forced us to work together to get anything substantial done.
Mm-hmm.
And we have seen this as recent as my lifetime, when President Reagan was in office and Tip O'Neill was the Speaker of the House. They actually worked together to get things done. Two bitter political enemies in the 90s, Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich, actually worked together. And so we just don't see
When they
that
had to,
when they had
right?
to. Yeah, when they had to. Yeah. But that was the point. You
Right.
had to. You had to work together to get
Right.
anything done. We just don't see that anymore. And so, because of this partisanship that we see in Congress, we see more executive actions coming from the executive branch. And that is monarchy light. And that's one of the things I think we really need to be concerned about in this country.
It's like did you ever have those moments growing up with your brother when you were fighting, and did your parents ever just throw you in a room and say, do not come out of here until you
Yeah,
work it
exactly.
out?
Yeah,
Like, I feel like where's that guy
Yeah,
that's
right.
throwing, Congress in a room, like, do not come out
Do
of here.
not come out.
So it still just doesn't seem like things are getting done. I mean, or progress is being made, at least not very functionally.
Yeah, right,
Maybe that's a misnomer that it ever was truly functional, but I think you're right. It does seem like it's just those walls are going up more and more,
Yeah.
and we're not talking.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad I got to go participate. It was an incredible day. Glad you got to see it. All of the rallies and marches across the country. So yeah, it was just a good day.
Yeah, the time lapses and the photos and things are all just I really enjoyed seeing them. So, but I'm glad I got to stay here because it was fun kind of seeing it unravel in real time. But I'm sorry I missed being with you in Oklahoma
You
City.
also mentioned the thunderstorm that came in.
That's true. I did.
Let me tell you, when you're holding a camera in downtown and lightning's going, you get out of there pretty quickly.
That's true. That's true.
So, speaking of good days, we had a good day this week sitting down with Reverend Liz Walker. And I'm going to let you take it from here.
Yes. And I hope I can tell this story in such a way that it resonates, but doesn't bore folks of my connection to Liz. I've referenced a few times on this other episodes about my time as a kid in the summers. I would fly up to Boston every summer for a couple of weeks. I had a dear aunt that was very close to who lived there. And let's be honest, my family happily shipped me off to Boston for 2 weeks every summer.
If there's any more trash left in the freezer, I'm going to be shipping you off to Boston.
I know. I feel like now looking back on that, my siblings and my parents, like,
it's a great summer for them.
The minute they would put me on the plane, just the whole house would be like, anyways. So that was my summer. Starting when I was about 8 or 9, I would fly up to Boston, and my aunt, who was a single professional woman working in fashion for a major department store and marketing and advertising and all such things, single, had no kids. So she loved having me up, and especially as a little girl. She would dress me up. We'd do photo shoots.
Well, I've seen photos.
I know. We'd go to the Cape, and she'd put me on the beach and play fashion photographer. We'd always shop for my school clothes every year. It was really fun. The other neat thing she did, as an aside, every summer when I would go up there, she was just such a writer, and she wrote journals her entire life. And so each year when I would go up to Boston, at night, we would read the diary from the year of the same age that I was.
Right.
So it was a really sweet,
that's cool,
tradition that she started. In any case, when I was, I don't know, in the late 80s, so I was 11 or 12 or so, she decided to have a child on her own. And I know that doesn't seem like a big deal, but back then
in the 80s
it still was a big deal. And she was enough, in, I don't know if you'd call it society, but, enough in life in Boston where it was, she was written up in the papers. It was
the fashion world knew her. I mean, obviously.
Yeah. So around the same time that my aunt learned that she was pregnant, she also saw that Liz Walker, who was a local news anchor, was also expecting. And so she reached out to her and said, hey, I'd love to talk with you, meet with you. as were expecting babies at the same time. And so they did. And through that time, they had Liz's son was born a couple of months before my cousin, and they developed a relationship, and they would hang out, play dates, and all these things. Sure. And so in the summers, as I continued to go up to visit, there were a couple of times where, right after the babies were born, I was up there and got to see both of them, and then another time for play date or something. But anyways, I just remember so vividly meeting Liz Walker and her son when he was born. Just seeing these two women together. One, I knew of Liz Walker because I'd watched her every summer on the news when I was in Boston. So that for a 12-year-old was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, you had a celebrity in your
It's like seeing your teacher out in the public. It just didn't make sense to me.
Sense,
I'm like, how does this happen? You don't live at the news desk?
You're in the box. Now you're here.
Right. So that was, impression number one. But number two, I don't think that people realize, like, just for me, a 12-year-old, again, growing up in Texas and in a different culture, so to speak, than you might find in the Northeast. I was like, these two very successful, brilliant women who are out here doing this thing and having these babies and, finding success and finding support with each other. It made an impression because I remember that day so vividly. So anyways, fast forward to about a month ago, we get an email from a publicist. There was a new book out by Reverend Liz Walker. Yeah. And I looked at that, I thought, oh my gosh, that is the Liz Walker that I met as a child that made such an impression on me. And so I, of course, quickly downloaded the book and listened to it and loved it and was so thrilled to hear of all the work that she's doing. Obviously, her life took a trajectory in a sense that she left journalism and became a minister and just had an incredible impact on the community in which she was ministering to. But anyways, I was so excited to do this interview and to talk to her about the fact that we had actually met before and that we had this connection. And as luck would have it, I had just recently gotten my hands on my aunt's diaries. She passed away in 2016 from cancer, and had been reading the stories from my cousin's first year, and those mentioned, Liz, and her son. So it was a really fun kind of full circle moment, a moment where I got to tell Liz, we know each other. Actually, we've met before, and here's our connection. So I don't know. It was really cool. That was something that's such a coincidence and such a small world.
Yeah. And I really appreciated just knowing that backstory because, I read the book. Her story in the book as a minister at Roxbury Presbyterian Church there in Roxbury, Massachusetts is an incredible story. But to know her background and your connection with her just made the time with her that much more enjoyable and rewarding. I know it was for you. You were excited.
I was very excited. Yeah. Like I said, I was so close to my aunt. And so it helped me kind of remember that and feel closer to her as well. But I thought it was interesting after we talked. I realized, Liz's trajectory, she went into journalism and then pivoted to go into ministry, is completely opposite from yours, I guess. You were in ministry and then pivoted into media.
In ministry?
You are. Obviously you are. But it was funny. But I will say like I said, as a child, I knew her and thought she was just famous and really cool, but I didn't realize she is quite accomplished. I was reading about she's received 2 Emmys, an Edward R. Murrow Award, has sat on the boards of many institutions, has started and helped with many charitable organizations. She's just so impressive.
So when you say she was famous, you're saying not only was she famous, she was like a trailblazer. She was a great journalist.
She was, and I didn't know that. Again, in my 12-year-old mind, I didn't realize that. But
you saw her in the box.
So yes, this was such a privilege on many levels. Personally, professionally, to have the chance to talk to Liz was just such a treat.
Absolutely. Well, we'll be back here in just a moment with Reverend Liz Walker, who's got a new book out titled No One Left Alone, a story of how community can help us. We've got a lot going on at Good Faith Media in 2025. New logo, new website, new initiatives, and if you don't know, our new magazine. Good Faith Magazine includes Bible study and lessons. Our new lesson writers are Kathy and Nathan Maxwell, and they host a free, short, weekly podcast in support of their Bible study lessons in the Good Faith Bible Study Podcast, and it's free. Learn more about the magazine, the lessons, the Maxwells, the podcast, and more at goodfaithmedia.org.
Welcome back to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, we've got a very special guest with us. Reverend Liz Walker is an ordained minister in the African Methodist Episcopal tradition. She is or was the pastor of Roxbury Presbyterian Church outside of Boston, Massachusetts. She graduated from Harvard Divinity School in 2005 and is a veteran TV journalist, the first African-American weeknight news anchor in Boston. Reverend Walker has a new book titled No One Left Alone, A Story of How Community Can Help Us. Reverend Walker, welcome to Good Faith Weekly.
It is so good to be with you, Mitch and Missy. I'm honored. So thank you for having me.
Well, Reverend Liz, let's begin with your story. As we discovered a few moments ago, you and I have a connection that goes way back to my childhood. And I remember watching you nightly when I would visit my aunt in Boston on the news. And you were such kind of just a mainstay in Boston and in the news business. So tell us, how does a news anchor, a pioneering news anchor in a major market like Boston, end up in ministry?
That is the question of my life, Missy. I ask myself that all the time. But the traditional way of answering that is that I was called out of television news into ministry, into urban ministry specifically. My father was a minister, and so I grew up in the church, but I was never thinking of that as a career. It wasn't interested to me at all. But when I went in 2001 with a group of ministers and humanitarians and human rights activists to South Sudan, and I was going to do a documentary on them. I did a documentary on them. But when I got there and what I saw and all that we experienced and people we met and people we witnessed, it changed my life. And so the people I went with told me that I was being called, that this was God's call, to see the devastation, to see the war, to see the remnants of war in this part of the world. And we ended up staying or going back and forth from Boston to South Sudan for 10 years. And we built a girls' school. That was when I was introduced to the idea of trauma.
Mhm.
So, trauma that was the backwash of a war, of a civil war, and people who had seen their villages burned and who had watched their relatives be killed. So it was a horrendous situation there. But that's when I, ended up going to Harvard, to divinity school, to seminary. That's when I was ordained in the Methodist Church. That all led to that. So was it one incident? No, but that was probably the most dramatic part of leaving television and going into ministry. There were many points though along the way, I think.
Sure. Well, one of the beautiful things about the book, first of all, congratulations on the book because it is so well written. I love all the stories that you included in it as you talk about this collective trauma. But it centers on a character that is deeply personal to you, and that is a young man by the name of Corey Johnson. Corey was unfortunately killed prior to your arrival at Roxbury Presbyterian. But your stories became very intertwined as you began to unpack this idea of collective trauma and systemic racism. So, for our audience, just briefly, could you introduce our audience to Corey?
Well, Corey was 27 years old. He was a member of Roxbury Presbyterian Church, where I've been called to minister after the Sudan experience. I started ministering there, or started pastoring there, excuse me, in 2011. And he had just been killed. So I'd never met
Right.
Corey. I met his mother and his large family. His family was from Trinidad Tobago, and they're a huge, beautiful Caribbean family who were leaders in the church. They asked me to do a memorial service for Corey. So that's really kind of how I got involved in Corey at all. And at this memorial service, with balloons and cakes and music and pictures and all of that, it was supposed to be a celebration. But
Mhm.
it was, through this memorial service, through talking to his mother, through learning a little bit more about the story, that I realized that Corey had been killed. Corey was one of probably 70 deaths in 2010 of gunshot victims, and most of them were Black, and most of them were young, and most of them were caught up in the violence in our community right in front of the church there.
Mhm.
Corey was not in the streets. He was not a gang member that his parents knew of or the community knew of. He just ended up dead one night. And his death devastated, as you might imagine, his family, the church, the whole community. So that's how I kind of got involved in the idea of trauma. Our church is a social justice church. So that means that we have the marches, we go meet with the mayor, we do all those things in the community about a social change.
Right.
But what I realized or recognized, or what God brought to me, was the idea that we never grieve, or we never grieve enough.
Mm.
We have the funeral, we do all that we can do as the body of Christ for people in pain, but then the world moves on,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and the family's stuck there in a point of devastation. Corey's mother in particular, Deborah, who's now one of my dear friends, talks about when the first she heard that her son was killed, she said, I just went numb. And she just no longer had any, she said she could almost divide up her body in a way, but part of her was just numb. She had no
Yeah.
feelings at all.
Mm.
And so that was how we kind of got into this idea of traumatic grief. And in speaking with her and in speaking with other members of the family, we were open to other families. It wasn't just this family. There were families who had lost their kids that year. There are families who had lost their kids 20 years before. And we decided to have this program that was part spiritual and part clinical. That's what makes our program different.
Yeah.
We're not, it's not a church service. It's just a gathering of people to come in and share their grief. There's no worship. There's no preaching. I like to compare it to AA for pain. You come in and you talk about your pain. And it was through this program that I, found out more about my own pain.
Yeah.
But it's just the idea that we don't know how to suffer. We suffer, but we don't understand that there are healthy ways to grieve, and there are ways to grieve in community that can be, if not curative, they can certainly be healing because you're not alone.
So we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about the program here in a minute. But one of the things I really appreciated about the book is the way you wove in a narrative. And so I want to talk a little bit about, to give our listeners some background context about the community of Roxbury itself. As I mentioned, Boston's a very special place for us. So it was especially interesting for us to hear more stories about that community specifically. And you did such a beautiful job of immersing us into both the beauty and the struggles of that community. So in fact, I found myself trying to figure out a way to snag an invitation to the Fitzpatrick family's meals. Like, how does one come by that? It sounded so fun. So I do want to ask you to talk to us a bit about the systemic racism that is just built into the fabric of that community. But not just that, I don't want to stop there. I want you to talk a bit about the beauty and the resilience of the community itself.
Right. When you talk about trauma in urban communities, and I call them urban communities because I don't think trauma is a Black thing or a white thing
Right.
or a brown thing, but it is an urban thing. It is a situation where you have lots of people, limited space, you have a lot of marginalization, you have poverty, you have a lot of needs. And so in those kinds of communities, you're going to see trauma. You're going to see people who are fighting addiction. You're going to find people who have lots of issues that bubble up to the surface. But the beauty of communities like these, and the beauty of the Fitzpatrick's family, is this big, and there are many families like this big sprawling family that lived throughout the neighborhood and took really good care of each other. When Oswald Fitzpatrick, the patriarch of the family, moved here from Trinidad to Tobago, he came to find a better way. This is an immigrant story. This is a story about people who are coming here to find a better way for his family. And so he worked hard so that his family could live better than he had lived in his homeland. And so this was a middle class or working class family, and Roxbury is a neighborhood full of it. Now of working class families. Now there's gentrification now. Things are changing. The economy is changing. Housing is becoming hard to find. Housing is expensive.
Mhm.
But in 2010, it was headed that way. But so you had this kind of breakdown where you had wonderful families doing great things. 99% of the people in this community are just trying to make a way through their lives.
Mhm.
And then you have that 1% that can wreak havoc on the rest of the community.
Yeah.
And that's what had happened in this neighborhood. The resilience of this neighborhood, of course, is that people seem to make a way when there's no way.
Mhm.
People survive these horrible situations and keep on living. And there's much to learn from that. But what we found was that people keep on living and they survive, but that's no way to live.
Mhm.
And those of us who are from the community of faith know that, God calls us to an abundant life, to a thriving life, a flourishing life. And so many of these people who are believers were just surviving. And a lot of the reason for that, Missy, is that they were carrying a lot. We are carrying a lot of wounds
Mhm.
that are untended. We are carrying a lot of grief that has been just kind of swept underneath all the other
Yeah.
emotions, and we don't deal with it. And it's just so we just go, that's what Corey's mom did. We just go about our business and decide we're not going to talk about it. Nobody likes to talk about grief. Nobody likes to talk about the things that hurt us, but those things do hold us back.
Mhm.
Our culture says, move on, get over it. The church even says, move on.
Mhm.
We've grieved with you for a while, but we have to go on. And so this was what we were thinking about. Maybe if we just gave people an evergreen way that if they needed time and space, this program or this kind of gathering would be there for them. We call it abiding. We would abide with them through that, whatever they needed, without cost, without any specific requirements, just to be there. Because the trauma that is in these kind of neighborhoods is both interpersonal and systemic.
Mhm.
And you talked about that, this whole systemic racism. Well, the idea, remember when COVID hit, right?
Mhm.
We realized that suddenly everybody didn't have an equal access to hospitals.
Right.
Everybody didn't have equal access to insurance. Those are the kinds of things that we think come from systemic problems, and we call it systemic racism. They cause systemic trauma, and those are the kinds of problems that compound to make people just, not be able to thrive.
Mhm.
And we wanted to do something about that.
Wrapped up inside this conversation about collective trauma, Reverend Liz, you do a wonderful job of also targeting generational trauma, that it continues through generation, and also has a physical effect upon the individual and collectively as community. I love what you wrote in referring to Cole Arthur Riley, and you write, "I reject any call to spirituality that divorces my mind from my body, voice, and other people." So you
Mhm.
talk about this idea of dealing with trauma in a very holistic way. And for me, that is very personal because I'm Muskogee Creek. And as an Indigenous person, my ancestors talked about the whole of a person. You could not separate the spirituality versus the physical of oneself. And I think you do a really good job not only describing this, but addressing it in the ministry at Roxbury Presbyterian. So, could you talk to us a little bit about the importance of approaching trauma generationally, but also holistically?
Well, I love that you mentioned Cole Arthur Riley. She is one of my favorite authors, and a young woman. It always takes me, you get wisdom from the youth, like you guys are young, and I'm supposed to be the wise one, but she has a lot of wise words. So I was really moved and am moved by her writing. But Indigenous people, Black people, people from the motherland, all of us know that our roots are full of kind of natural and spiritual ways to heal from all kinds of systemic issues that we have faced from generation to generation to generation. I carry the wounds of my parents and my grandparents, as do you. And if they didn't heal them, then they're not healed when they're passed on to me. But the idea of healing body, mind, and spirit is also comes, as I said, coming from our background. So what I guess I'm trying to say is that we have in us the capacity to heal, but we got removed from that with modernity, I think. And for us in the African American, in the Black community, we don't realize that when our ancestors played the drums, and when they moaned, and when they moved, and when they danced, and this is before slavery. Then into slavery, we were introduced to Christianity, and we even took this religion and made it work for us, in that we added all of those other things that help us not just survive, but thrive. So there's generational trauma that has been passed on. I can give you a very a personal situation. My father was a World War II, he was a chaplain in World War II. Black men were treated horribly in the military in World War I and World War II, and came out of that to a horribly racist situation. My father did. He was in Mississippi. He was in Arkansas. He was in Mississippi, and he married the woman whom he loved. This is my interpretation. And my mother died because I believe she died because she didn't get the health care that she needed when she was pregnant. So my father never really dealt with her death. This is my interpretation of what happened in his life. And his pain was passed on to my brother and me, which I talk about in the book. And I don't talk about that to go, woe is me, but just to say that we all bring things with us. We all do. And trauma goes to both the perpetrator and the victim. So Resma Minicum, I don't know if you know his book, My Grandmother's Hands, but he talks about that. There's just so much research out there now that tells us that, James Baldwin wrote, we carry our history with us.
Yeah.
And we do. And until we begin to flesh that out and realize that, we won't heal. We'll always be in pain. So that's what that part of the writing was about for me. And it's very personal because I saw it in my own family.
I really appreciated hearing your story in the book. I'm hoping maybe we can touch on that in a minute if we have time. But for now, let's talk about the nuts and bolts of Can We Talk? Inspired by Corey's story, you began this group at your church to address the trauma in the community. So tell us, just kind of walk us through how this works. What makes it different than another program a church might offer?
Well, what we decided to do, and this was after our study and talking to mental health workers and health workers and health administrators and lots of people in our community, talking to the police, talking to all kinds of people, but a lot of trauma specialists especially, we decided to just have a safe space. Trauma, Judith Herman, who is one of the writers or one of the researchers who first kind of discovered the concept of trauma through domestic violence, through the Vietnam War, wrote about the idea that trauma is disconnection, it is isolation, and it's a loss of safety and meaning. Those are some of the signs of trauma. So if you've been in an accident, or if you have been the victim of some kind of violence, or if you witnessed that, these are the things that can happen to you. You lose your sense of safety, you lose your sense of meaning, and you feel isolated. So how could we restore that? And that's when we came up with the idea of a gathering, a community, something that we could do consistently, that people could stop by, drop in without any referral, once a week, whenever we had it. We started out once a month. We would have a meal. And those of us in the church know that that's everything, right? I mean, to gather at the table is really important. Hospitality and love and just, being able to relax and connect over a meal. So we'd have a meal. And then we might have an artist get up. And the artist, and this is that whole idea of contemplative healing. The artist might play something or sing or dance, just something to set the atmosphere. It could be church music. It doesn't have to be church music, but it's healing music. We get up then our program is peer led. So everyone in the program has experienced something the facilitator for that particular session gets up, gives guidelines, and the guidelines are just what you can expect from this evening. We're glad you're here. Please share for just a few minutes, 2 or 3 minutes. Please tell your own story. We're not here to advertise programs or give, and there's no back and forth response to this. This is just a moment to share what you have to share, and then someone else will get up and do the same. And there will be moments of silence. And so then we open it up. It's like an open mic. And you'd be surprised, even the first night we did this, when all we had was a sign on the side of the building that explained what we were trying to do. People came and people shared. They immediately got what we were trying to do. And they talked about all kinds of things: the violence in the community, racism, their own losses, losing jobs, the natural deaths that they had experienced, rape, suicide. People, it was amazing that people were so willing to trust each other. The trust of this gathering comes because in the guidelines we ask, we say, what's said here, please let it stay here. There's no signal, you don't have to sign anything, but we're asking you to hold whatever you hear, and that we all share. So there's no hierarchy. There's no me standing up as the preacher saying, you tell your stories. I have my pain. And that kind of sets the atmosphere. That it goes on for about an hour, sometimes a little bit more, but it's not a long night. And at the end of that sharing, we have a ritual. And the ritual is to kind of bind us in community until we meet again. We started out, as I said, monthly. The community, people who were coming, then asked us, we want to learn more about trauma. So some nights we decided to have trauma education. We invited people in to talk. But the basic night, the basis of the whole thing was just community sharing. We now have 20 sites, and this has just been from word of mouth, mainly in Massachusetts, but also in Washington, D.C., in Harlem, in Sarasota, Florida, where I live, and Gary, Indiana, Chattanooga, Tennessee. So it's expanding on the idea that people need safe spaces to talk without judgment and without quick fixes. And that's what I think separates it sometimes from church. I love church, but we can be judgmental in churches.
I don't know what you're talking about. I grew up Southern Baptist. We don't do that.
You're a recovering Southern
I'm
Baptist.
recovering. Aren't we all recovering in our own way?
It's a little judgmental sometimes. So this is not to replace church.
Sure.
This is not saying church is bad, but it's just a supplement. It's in the basement. We have this in the basement programs, and people have really, it's resonated with people.
Yeah.
I love how you describe the program as soft spaces and hard places. That phrase just keeps ringing through my mind. And the other little anecdote I wondered if you would share is about the name itself and the connection to Corey.
Well, and for me, let me tell you two things: soft spaces and hard places. I wanted that to be the name of the book, but my publisher didn't agree, so that's that. I just want to say that because
publishers.
It was just such a good idea. But the idea of can we talk? It came to me. I was thinking about Joan Rivers. Now, you're both too young, but when I was growing up,
I remember Joan. Absolutely.
You know, she was a big comedian, and one of her catchphrases was, can we talk? And I always thought that was just a great phrase. But it turned out that Tevin Campbell, a singer, had written a song called Can We Talk, which was a hit. R&B, not R&B, pop song. And it was Corey's favorite song, which I did not know. When his sister and I were talking once during COVID, and we were talking about the idea of can we talk, and she said, well, Reverend Liz, that was Corey's favorite song. And that blew me away. I call that a God moment, because that was not the plan. And that was never in my mind, but that resonates with people because that's what we're talking about. We're just saying we don't talk enough to each other in this country, and we don't listen. We shout at each other.
Yes.
We talk at each other, but we don't talk with each other, and we don't talk to each other. So that's how we got to Can We Talk? And it's all about Tevin Campbell and Joan Rivers, but mainly it's the idea of just listening to each other.
I didn't know the Joan Rivers tie-in, but that makes me love it even more. But I did
It's
just
old school.
exactly. I did just get chills when you shared the story about the connectivity with Corey, and just like you said, that it's just such a God moment.
Yeah.
It was. There have been so many.
I don't think we can minimize the importance of sharing your story and having someone listen to your story. Because, Reverend Liz, our world, as you just articulated, is filled with noise, and it seems as though we talk at each other and we don't listen to one another and to really communicate. And this is what this program does, and it does it so well. And you lay out in the book, story after story, about what it means for people to have their story heard. And
Yeah.
that is so significant these days. It humanizes people because it's your story, and you can't argue with your story. It's your story. And like you said, there's judgment sometimes associated with that, but to eliminate that judgment and just to accept someone's story is so significant. So I really resonated with that.
And that's all we're talking about. And you know
Mhm.
what? To a certain extent, Mitch, I think that's what's wrong, right, with us. We have lots of things wrong right now, but the fact that people have not felt heard,
Right.
and underneath a lot of the anger and a lot of the polarization, there's a lot of pain.
Mhm.
And so I think that, quite simply, that's what we have to do at some point, all the way around, is talk. And yeah.
Absolutely. Well, before I turn it over to Missy to ask one last question, Reverend Liz, there are going to be many people out there that says, how can I start one of these conversations at our local church? So how can our listeners glean more information about Can We Talk and how to deal with trauma in their communities?
The simplest thing I can give you is our website, which is canwetalknetwork.org. canwetalknetwork.org. And on that website, we have everything you would need to know. We are working, this is how grassroots we are. The book came out in April. We're still working on a curriculum that is just going to give you the basics so that you could start this in your church, because that's all we want. This
Yeah.
is not a franchise. You don't have to buy into this. And we would like to keep a relationship going when you start it, just to find out how it works for you. But the way to start is canwetalknetwork.org. And we'd love to talk with you. We're standing by, as they say on those commercials. We have people standing by.
I love
We
that.
will get back with you and keep this abiding conversation going.
Excellent. Well, Reverend Liz Walker, thank you for joining us at Good Faith Weekly. The book is titled No One Left Alone, a story of how community can help us. But Reverend Liz, before we let you go, Missy's got one last question to ask you, and I'm going to turn it over to her.
And before
Okay.
I ask it, I just want to say that one of the quotes from the book that I forgot to mention early on is when you said talking about the world's problems no longer seemed as important as trying to solve them. And I just want to say that I think you are doing just that. And I thank you for the book and for starting this program and for the hope that you're spreading.
So you have had me close to tears since we started talking.
Well, Reverend Liz, as you know, our tagline at Good Faith Media is "There's more to tell." So in light of your work and our conversation today, what is your more to tell?
My more to tell, I think, is that this book is my story. It is what it is the way I'm learning to heal. So I just want people to know that, we all have something to heal. God wants us whole. And one way to get on that path, is to begin to talk. So this is, I am in the process of healing. And it's through people's response to this has been very, very helpful to me. So my more to tell is I'm going to write another book.
Oh, good.
And I'm going to, God willing, I'm going to tell just about how I'm healing in life as I grow into this season of my life. I hope that gives you a little bit more about what. Sure.
Absolutely. And when that book is published, make certain to reach out to us because we want to have you back on the program. So
You guys are on my list for many reasons. Thank you so much. This has been really wonderful. Thank you.
Well, thank you. You are welcome back anytime, Reverend Liz.
Okay. Be well.
You You've been listening to Good Faith Weekly, hosted by Mitch and Missy Randall. This weekly podcast from Good Faith Media discusses matters of faith and culture.
Subscribe wherever you get your podcast and give us a like and a glowing review. We produce the podcast out of Norman, Oklahoma. Our music comes from Pond 5.
And we're supported by listeners like you. Learn more about us at goodfaithmedia.org.